There once lived a company known for distributing video games, consoles, and more. It would provide all of this while focusing on the customer. That company still exists today and flourishes. It's known as Valve. Valve is everything that Sony should be, a company built on the consumer and the producer. But recently, Sony's been messing everything up. How did this beloved company go from the top of the gaming industry to nothing more than a company refusing to make physical media? Sony used to be the company that sold you everything. They started out in May 1946 as a small electronic workshop. They sold TVs, the Walkman, DVDs, Blu-rays, cameras, and eventually consoles. But what's important isn't exactly what they were selling, it's just that they sold you the entire chain. The disc for the TV, the SD cards for the camera, and that was kind of the first signs of dark times. Because even if Sony was making it easy for the consumer to go to one of these brands for all of these items, it set the seeds of making Sony as powerful as they are. As Sony's influence grew, they partnered with Nintendo for a CD-ROM add-on. But Nintendo backed out of the deal. Because Sony had already spent so much money on creating this add-on, they decided to make their own console in spite of Nintendo. Man, Nintendo always be taking some of the biggest losses, but they also got some of the greatest wins. Same with Sony as well. Well, the PlayStation would become a hit, and was the first console in history to ship over 100 million units globally. The PS2 release would somehow go even better, becoming the greatest selling console of all time. It was due to the hardware and the games that the PS2 had, but a large part of it was the fact that it also worked as a traditional DVD player. Sony would ride this high feeling good about themselves until... Unfortunately, the common consensus is bigger equals better. Sony was taking that model to the extreme, using resources to create their greatest console ever. Expensive technology, Blu-ray discs, Sony wanted the PS3 to become more than just a console. They wanted your living room and your home to be centered around it. Unfortunately, the launch of the PS3 was rough. You think today's prices are bad? Try $600 for the PS3. Okay, that's still really bad. Worse today? Yes, but that's also still incredibly bad. Sony's expensive technology was a nightmare for developers to program for. The games that were made and programmed were buns too. The launch lineup included Resistance Fall of Man, Genji Days of the Blade, and NBA 2K7. There's a reason you most likely don't remember these games. This gave rise to their biggest competitor, Microsoft. Nintendo's prayers had been answered. Sony had become a competitor to Nintendo, and now Microsoft had become a competitor to Sony. Nintendo took this opportunity to slip away and do their own weird thing with the Wii. The failures of the PS3 taught Sony one big lesson. Consumers don't really care about how fancy something is, they care about the convenience of it. The PS3 was too ambitious for itself and for the customer, but luckily Sony would bounce back with the PS4. Sony locked in and decided to go back to their roots. Simplicity, cheaper cost, developer friendly, focus on the games, and just, in general, more straightforward. It was a correction of the mistakes Sony had made with the PS3, and it worked. This was when Sony rediscovered that their gaming industry, the PlayStation, wasn't just another avenue for revenue. It was a platform. And during the PS4 era, there was another console, the PS Vita. Long story short, this handheld didn't perform nearly as well as the PS4, causing them to abandon it shortly after. Sony realized that they weren't willing to put resources into anything if it wasn't going to be the next PS2 or PS4. Now is when Sony's greed really took hold. With the original PlayStation and PS2, all you had to do was get the console and the games being sold as discs. Then with the PS3, you added the PlayStation Network, which was expanded upon with the introductory of a monthly subscription as PS Plus. By the PS4 era, subscribing to PS Plus was essentially mandatory, only being an option if you were cool with only offline games. Then comes the PS5, where they offer a digital-only console. And this made it mandatory for you to be in Sony's PlayStation Network ecosystem. That's when Sony thought, if we already have people in our online ecosystem, why even have the physical side to it at all? So, arguably, in this instance, the creation of the PS Store was more important than the console. Because now, you couldn't have a disc get resold, borrowed, or collected. You have Sony requiring you to put in a digital transaction. It keeps it within Sony's ecosystem, without a retailer like Target or GameStop. And this felt even worse because the PS3 and PS Vita stores shut down in July 2026. And that's why receiving a physical disc preserves access long after the company starts preserving the ecosystem. Because of Sony's sheer amount of success with the PlayStation, it made them confident in making a decision like this. And it's ironic because the company that created Blu-rays is now stepping away from physical media. They're attacking our freedom to collect, to sell, to own. I understand producing video game discs isn't cheap. You got production costs, retailer cuts, shipping costs, but it shouldn't be about the money. It's about providing a product that you could be proud of and a product that the customer can be happy buying. It just feels like the death of physical media is a start to a company like Sony deciding that you don't own things. What happens when Sony decides you're only buying a trial of the game you purchased instead of owning it?